Hey, Romit. Hey, Romit, can you hear me?
Hey Ben,
How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Oh, I'm pretty chill. Not too bad. How's your day been? I feel like it's been a little bit. It hasn't been that long, but
Am I audible to you?
yeah, I can hear you nice and fine. Oop, wrong chat. Yeah, I can hear you. Harrison, are you there?
Hey guys.
Hello, it's been a while.
Oh, sorry. I think my audio is being a bit funny.
Oh, I can hear you fine. Can you hear me, Romit?
Sorry.
That's
Yes,
all good.
I can.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. You can hear me, Harrison?
Seems to be the AirPods with a Mac just don't play very well.
I've had the same thing. For the past 2 months, I've had router restart issues at the exact time I've been running a workshop every single week at it's like 5 a.m. and it's been the worst
Oh
thing.
man,
Just
that is
ridiculous.
infuriating. Yeah, that is infuriating, I should say.
Good to see you though.
It's
It's been a while.
you too. I know. It's been busy. I think last time we spoke, I think last time we spoke, I was at the bureau, and I've moved on to Vic Roads now. So,
Ooh.
yeah, so full steam ahead. So
Vic Roads, very nice. I always liked
yeah,
Victoria's designs related things. They always seem to have some interesting stuff going on.
yeah, it's good. It's quite an interesting uh setup as Vic Roads is now a joint venture between three superannuation funds. So it's all private now for the most part.
Wow.
Yeah.
As in
So
Victoria Roads?
yeah, so Vic Roads are much like the sort of governing body that does like New South Wales or in the ACT like like your rego or your licensing. That's all
interesting.
privatized. Yeah.
Privatized venture. It's normally like your local government that deals with it. That's really interesting. Didn't know.
Yeah. So it's a really interesting setup, but it makes for some really interesting sort of design work. So so it's been good so far. Yeah.
I'm just letting
and
all
Remit
our
as well.
talkers in the room.
Hi, Harrison. Hey,
Alex.
hey, how's it going?
Yeah, good. What about yourself?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Everyone's here. The crew is gathered. Eva, you made it. Hello.
Hey, good morning. Oh, good morning from New York.
Good morning. What time is it for you?
8 a.m.
Oh, wonderful. I've spotlighted
that's
I'm
good
just gonna let
timing.
everyone in, but we can keep chatting away, and we'll give people a few minutes to join. Thanks so much for jumping on it. Whatever time you're on, it's 10 p.m. for you, right, Harrison? Or have we got daylight savings mixed up?
Yeah, no, that's right. It's 10 p.m. at the moment. So.
Wonderful. What about you, Alex?
2 p.m.
2 p.m. Not bad. Romit?
5 a.m.
5 a.m. 5 a.m.
Yes.
Thank you for joining. Eva?
Me? 8 a.m.
8 a.m. Not too bad. I think I think this is the best time spot we could get, even though we're on like opposite sides of the world. Welcome everyone who's joining in, by the way. We would love to know what time it is where you are, and also where you're joining us. So chuck that in the chat. We'll just give it a few minutes before we kick off. So we got 6 a.m. from Mexico. Ooh, very cool. Welcome, Angelo. Good to see a familiar face. I see you there. 9 a.m. Brazil. Wonderful. Time zones. 2 p.m. Poland. Poland. There we go. Sounds like Holland when I say it that way. 7 p.m. Vietnam. 5:30 p.m. India. 3 p.m. Israel. I think we've almost got all the time. Argentina. Okay, wonderful. Still got more people joining in. We'll give them a few minutes. I was going to say it's almost the middle of the week. I was going to ask how your weekends are, guys. Harris and Alex, I hope it wasn't too bad. Eva and the crew.
No, it was pretty good. What did I get up to? I was actually doing a bit of design work on the weekend. But other than that, just enjoying the weekend, just doing things around the house, around the city. So nice.
And Bangladesh. We have another New York. Michael, good to see you on the call again. Welcome. 2 p.m. South Africa. I feel like I need to export all the time zones and then organize them by their time just to see if we get everything. Okay. Ooh, I'm hearing mics. If your mic is on, I'm gonna mute you. Let's see. Give yourself a mic check if your mic is accidentally on, just in case, or we will manually mute you anyway. While we give it an extra minute, we would love to hear in the chat, what are you hoping to get out of today's call? You've joined something called More Than UI, building design systems that connect. So I would love to hear in the chat, what are you hoping to learn today, hear about today? And we'll give you guys a minute to type that and just chuck it in the chat here. And we can have some guidelines to make sure maybe we cover some of your favorite questions. So the question here is, chuck it in the chat. What are you hoping to learn by the end of today's call? Is there something interesting you're wanting to cover? Are you dealing with something interesting at work? Or are you wondering what the hell are design systems? And how do I figure this mess out? Last few people trickling in. Joel would like to understand the success factors of UI. Very nice. Thank you, Joel, for putting that in the chat. And we will be writing these down. I will be writing them down specifically. Understand more how colleagues use design systems on their work. So some nice real examples. I like that. Thank you, Angelo. Learn more about design systems in general. Got recommendations for learning resources. Thank you, Eva. I feel like there's a never-ending list of design system resources that grows bigger every day. Got Sanjay. How would non-UI elements fit into design systems? You have joined the right call. We won't be covering UI. At least we'll be trying not to as much as possible. That's today's challenge. You will receive a recording of the session. Yes, Sharanya, thank you for asking. I think that's just about everyone. I'd like to learn how to optimize the design systems I create and make them more beneficial for stakeholders. Ooh, I like that one. Okay. Well, keep chucking what you're hoping to learn in the chat. If you want us to specifically address it, that's the way you're going to get it to us. In the meantime, I'm going to shut our music off, which I hope you've been hearing. And for the latest ones, just in case, right before everyone introduces themselves, what are you hoping to learn from today's call? Chuck that in the chat. And please let us know. And check your mic just in case you are on. Okay, making sure I'm not muting any of our lovely callers on today. Okay. Well, without further ado, please, welcome our panel guests, which includes myself. It includes Harisson. We have Harisson Cochrane, Alex Chan Perryman, Eva Yu, and Romit Soley. Guys, please welcome aboard. Would you like to give yourself a bit of an introduction? Who are you? Where do you work? And a little maybe quick brief about your experience or involvement in design systems.
Who's going to go first? I'll jump in. I'll jump in and make it quick. I'm Alex. I've been working with design systems. My first interaction was 2016 with this kind of space, but that wasn't really defined then. And I've been specializing in it full time for the last 3 years. Yeah, and currently I'm working at Deel. We're a really, really fast growing startup. And yeah, the team has grown from 20 people to 40 since I've been here. And we're a very small team on the design system, and we support everyone. And really my role has changed from a designer to a product manager / ops person. And now we have another person doing all the design stuff. So yeah, that's me. I'll
Very
nominate.
cool.
Harisson.
Sorry, I think I jumped in there. I'm really interested to know what the changeover was like from design to your current role. That sounds really interesting. But yes, everyone, hi. I am currently working as a UX and a UI designer, and really focusing on the design system at Vic Roads, where I'm working at the moment. So Vic Roads manages the rego and the licensing and a lot more for vehicles within our state of Victoria. So before that, I was working in like a UX and UI role in the weather space, which was really interesting. So lots of different ways to use a design system, for different reasons. But yeah, we're in a really interesting space now where the offerings are evolving, and the design system really needs to as well. So looking to improve upon that, and I've been sort of working with design systems for probably the last 2 or 3 years now. So evolving my knowledge and my skills in the area as well, which has been really good fun. Cool. I guess this means I get to choose somebody next. So I'm going to say Eva.
I'm actually part of the audience today, but I'm definitely passionate about design system ever since I become a product designer. Wherever I go, I will push to create a design system. So I actually created 2 design systems in the past. When I first joined a startup, I pushed the whole team to realize the importance of design system, and I work closely with our developer to create one from scratch. And in my last role, I'm also jumped into a design system while I was working as a product designer. So I'm definitely passionate about design system, and I'm very happy that I see so many people joining the panel today, and apparently that all the designers super excited and aware the importance of design systems right now. So currently, if you didn't know, I'm actually working as a newsletter editor for our case study club, and also working as a freelance product designer for a interior design magazine company. Nice to meet you all.
So if you've seen any of the latest Case Study Club newsletters, that's been all Eva, and she's been doing an amazing job. So great work, Eva. We've been loving all your work so far. So just wanted to call you out.
Yeah, and also just...
Romit. Yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, okay, just a short advertisement. We are going to send out a user survey shortly for our design for our newsletter. So if you have a moment, please help us to make the newsletter better.
Awesome, thank you, Eva. Romit, come on in, mama.
Hey guys, my name is Romit. I'm currently a master's student in user experience. I have like 8 years of experience in product designing, and I've worked in 3 design systems from scratch. And I would say my first stab in like design system was almost in 2017 or 18, like when none of the like the team knew like how do we really evolve these these unupdated UI components, and how do we figure out to make it more cohesive UIs in nature. So that's where I started developing the interest. And over the years, while I started working with different companies, I noticed that like how based on different mindset of company's vision, how does design system changes altogether, and how evolved like our process has to be. So yeah, it was an like exciting challenge, and that helped me like in establishing design system frameworks and processes in 4 companies.
Wonderful. Thank you, Romit. So this panel is called More Than UI, and I am purposely going to call on Harisson, because you and I had a little bit of a brainstorming, and I think we went back and forth over a few ideas. And I'm going to ask you, when you heard More Than UI, what were you thinking? Because we both were like, oh, we like that one. We had quite a few different ideas, I believe. So I just want to call you out on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, it was really great to brainstorm with you, Ben. So it was really great to do that. I think when I think of More Than UI, I think of all of the tiny interactions that will go into creating a design system or a framework that the whole business buys into. It's not just like a UI library that you might start off and then just try and get the rest of the sort of wider business into, but it's working to build cadence with your developers, with sort of the rest of your designers, to get that buy-in, to understand the landscape, like what you're building for, where the business wants to go, and why you might be sort of doing that. And then also the runway that you've got as well, and also looking at I guess what you've got to work with. Are there things that need to be run in tandem with what you're doing? So if you need an uplift to your back end or your front end, sort of, what's the word I'm looking for the underlying tools and tech, what needs to be done to support what you're trying to design and bring into the business. So yes, so I think there's a few things that sort of go into it, but yeah, it's a really exciting space, and always lots to think about and always lots to talk about. So yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to hand that also over to kind of Alex and then Romit, and we'll maybe start like diving into a few of these questions and get into the meat of the details. Alex, from your perspective, when you heard the title More Than UI, we talked about design systems quite a few times. I think you gave a review on my design system, and I just realized I didn't actually introduce myself. So hi everyone, I'm Ben, the community facilitator for Case Study Club Pro. I work with Eva and Jan, who I hope all of you know was the founder of Case Study Club. I've spent the past year building a design system for a very low maturity company who has no idea what a design system is. And we only just got Figma about 3 months ago. So they're all very excited about this right now. So I've spent the past 12 months trying to figure out what is typography? What is, how do you choose colors? What is that? What is an 8-point grid? I've been designing for the web for about 10 years, mainly on the developer code side, actually. So it's kind of pulled together both the back end and the front end side of my experience into my design experience. So it's been quite enlightening. And the idea for this panel came also from my side when I've had a lot of great chats with Alex, especially as well. We've had quite a few calls over the past 6 months, and we realized everyone's talking about UI, everyone's talking about components, but really the hardest part is outside of that. That's where the biggest challenges that all designers tend to face. The UI library is the easiest part, in my opinion. But it's the decisions, it's the people, it's everything else, all the messy parts that really make it challenging and different, but also fun at the same time. So that's where that's coming from. Alex, what about you from your perspective? What's more than UI encompass?
Yeah, I think your description was pretty good of like the UI being the easiest part. When I kind of started out on my journey into this space, it really started out as being like we had a project and we knew that we wanted to have reusable components, so made a UI library. And that was really the first thing. We weren't really aware that we were building a design system. But then as that project grew, the things that we began to understand that we needed to maintain this and receive requests and updates and changes, suddenly, very quickly, we realized that this was something much bigger than a UI library, because we were sharing this across teams, across different regions. And yeah, so really it's like, I always think of design systems as like a system of systems. And I feel like that's a bit of a cliche to say that at this point, but it's really what it is. Like the color is the system and the typography is a system, and yeah, the components are all part of that system, and you have different scales of components, small ones and bigger ones and really big ones and templates. Yeah, and then you've got like tokens, and you can kind of use all these things together to achieve different things. So you can, for example, we're in the process of trying to figure out how to do dark mode. You can do that with tokens. That's the best way to do that. But in order to do that, you need to have all of the components in your UI system, your library, they all need to have tokens in them. And then all of the components that are in your application all need to be from your UI library in order for your app to completely 100% have tokens. And so if you do this and then you enable the system where you can switch between color palettes, you really need to have like 100% adoption in the app. And that's something that I've discovered is like incredibly hard for us to do, because we're moving so fast, and like it's quicker for teams to build stuff at the moment themselves than use UI components sometimes. So yeah, there's like all these kind of complex offshoots that come off it. But yeah, and then also to kind of go back to my intro, like the thing that I've really been focusing on in the last few months is more like the operational side of how we operate as a team, so that management thing. And then the thing that we're starting to do is to do more surveys actually with the team, which I think would be interesting to talk about. I think that relates to someone's question earlier about how you kind of measure this stuff. I've got a good answer for that, something that I'm doing at the moment. I've forgotten the last point I was going to make, so I'm going to stop and hand over to Romit there, because I think I've said enough.
Thank you so much. Actually, I like the fact that you said system of systems, because I would say that like design system is a really complex topic. And talking about UI, I would say it's not as simple as we think. Like if we talk about like implementing data table or table and drop down, it has a lot of variants to focus on. So I understand that. So coming back to like your the question, like what is more than UI? I would say is like when we understand a whole spectrum of design system, where it starts from the initiation to the execution and maintenance. Every one of them requires some process. And especially at the initiative level, it is, as like, Harrison's pointed out, like buy-in is important. But in buy-in also, it's very important to understand like how, how the startup is, and like how much patience do they have, like to, towards like the completion of a design system. Some may have a lot of time, some may don't, and accordingly you have to change your process. Second thing is, I would say, is the impact and the metrics behind the design system. It's not as simple as we see today in Medium articles or like some other articles where some straightforward terms have been used, like adoption rates and this and that, and it's not the actual answer. There is a lot more behind it, and it goes back to like what kind of goals you have set as per the company's timeline. And then I would say drilling down to I would say the understanding of like how you are going to implement the components. It also is important that we define some principles and some frameworks on how other designers are going to be implementing those components. And that is which is like right now today misunderstood, because as I said, like there have been tons of resources, but when it is expected to be more effective, it hasn't been. And therefore, like we have to do a lot of research on like how this whole framework actually operates. And that's where like we have to be very cadenced towards like how you are basically stepping up towards different kinds of processes, and like how you are able to like allow the designers to effectively utilize it. That's what like my forte has been, where like I've been doing tons of strategy work with the different stakeholders, and try to come up with the different sets of frameworks to from the design towards the execution, and later on at the monitoring side. And that's what I realize is what I can say is more than UI.
Well said, Romit. Well said. I think a great place for us to start, especially we've got a lot of questions, and let's try and start. I think at a great spot is the beginning. So building the business case for a design system, it's not in place. You're at that start. Can you maybe each tell us a little about your experience when you had to start from scratch, or when you had to build the business case? I know we kind of have to build the business case always across the entirety, its use of a design system, not just at the start. We're always kind of telling people about it. We're always trying to help people understand their role with or their interactions with the design system. But what's it's been like being the designer at the center, maybe the one with all the design system info, if you're that designer, if maybe you're part of a larger team, also relevant. But how has it been building that design system, or building a design system from your perspective? Have you been part of a team? Have you been a UX team of one? What have you told people when they've asked, what is a design system? And have you brought them on board?
I can jump in quickly on this one. I feel like my experience with this has been quite different to a lot of people. I've always worked on projects that have had pretty good buy-in from the beginning. So I've never had that kind of suffering of like having to explain to stakeholders like why you're doing this. So the first one we ever did was pretty much kicked off by the CEO. And then the second one I worked on was up and running, and then I was kind of contributing to it and helping it. And then the third one was it was up and running. It was a complete mess, but I came in and helped to fix it up. So I've never had that issue. I think the thing that I've heard that's kind of the common story is like, just make it. Like if you ask someone like, hey, can we do this design system thing? And they're like, no, there's no resources or time. It's like, just do it anyway, because it will save the company money. And then you're doing it on like a really like simple framework where I mean, yeah, if you need to have a conversation with a stakeholder and just say, look, yeah, we're going to do this thing anyway because it's going to save the company a bunch of time. Then that goes to like, how do you explain these things? How do you measure the impact of this? Which I can talk to a bit. But yeah, and there isn't a tool or like a thing that you can do to do this. But the thing that I've seen, and what seems to be becoming the industry norm with this, is like ask a developer how long it takes them to build something from scratch, and then ask them how long it takes to build a page with reusable components. And then typically the gap is like 3 or 4 hours. So then you can go to a stakeholder and say, look, you know, how many developers do we have in the company? How many things do we want to build? It's like, well, a design system will help us achieve, you know, X amount of hours. But I think that's one of the biggest things that I've learned in the company that I'm at now, is that so much of what a company does and cares about is about bringing new revenue in. And a design system, it's like, it can never really do that. You can find ways to make things more efficient, and you can save a bunch of company money, like that would otherwise be spent by time. But we can create the best system in the world, but it's not going to like, you know, increase sales by like 2x or something like this. It can enable extra features like accessibility in dark mode and things like this. But yeah, that's the thing that I've kind of seen this year. And because of that, it has like a kind of lower class status compared to like other things the company looks at, just kind of taking a step back and viewing it from like other people's perspective. But yeah, that's been my experience.
Harisson, can I throw this over to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, you really hit you've really hit the nail on the head is what I'm trying to say, Alex. With I think just trying to baseline with a business the expectation around what the design system will and won't do. I think when you look at it, you know, it's really a great tool to create company-wide alignment with everything that you're doing, and to ensure that when you're expanding, when you're growing, when you're doing really anything, that it's aligned, it's true to the label, and it's like it evolves at the same pace as everything else. So I mean, you know, I've been you know, lucky to work in sort of businesses where there have been, you know, sort of your design systems that have been you know, developed for years, and they're really, you know, far along, so you get to see what it's like after years of work has, you know, gone into something. And then there have been businesses where it's sort of you know, been started off by like a small, you know, firm that you've asked, you know, to come in and you know, start the operation of a design system for you, you know, to get you started. And then there have been businesses where there's not much at all, and you're building from scratch, and you're trying to ensure that that everything that you're doing is aligned. But you know, there's so much out there, you know, that sort of needs to be you know, sort of needs to be aligned or you know, fixed for it to work. But that can be a longer term issue and not something that you need to solve at the time. So I think, yeah, it's been really interesting, yeah, to sort of experience those things. But I think when we're thinking, or at least when I'm thinking about, you know, design systems, I'm currently going through the process of co-drafting a business case for a design system. And trying to get that buy-in, I think can take several different forms, and it's not quite clear, I think, for any business, or there's not one way that you go about that buy-in, and that might be you might have a really enthusiastic CEO, and he's like, yes, I'm really into this, let's do it, this is the money, these are the resources, let's build it. And then in other businesses, you might see that it's really difficult to get things off the ground, and I think that's where it really helps to be able to work closely with your dev team, with product, to have those relationships there, to say, okay, we need to bring things in, let's start a rhythm around what we think we can do, let's just sort of look at the environment, let's try and understand what we can do together, to build that velocity, so we can start to build something that's greater than what we're starting with, essentially. And it takes time, and there's a lot of ways of doing it. So I think there's no one way, but there's no one right way of reaching that sort of buy-in state where you've got everyone all excited. But it's an incremental process. And yes, it is really frustrating sometimes, because you do feel like you're not getting anywhere, and you're the only one that might understand the value of it. But sometimes that is the way. But I think you can use that as a way to say, okay, what do I need to do to enhance the way I'm speaking about a design system, or the way that I try and market the use of a design system within the business. And yeah, it's a really great way to grow as well. I found that, for me personally. So yeah, there's always an upside, whichever way you look at it.
I just want to touch on that with some of the personal experience. I especially think this is very prevalent if you're having to build a design system for the first time, or you're new to it. We have a habit of being so in love with the idea of a design system that we pitch such a vision and such a power play for what it could be, and not necessarily as much as how it's going to be useful now, or where it's going to be most useful right now. And I was very much guilty of that, especially in the early stages. And I would pitch the big vision of this interconnected product ecosystem where the user experience is consistent, and we're deploying across to multiple teams and multiple designers, but we have a design team of two, and of two people, and a product development team that is barely agile and still moving over to the cloud. So my vision was very much as I was in love with it, it was way too far ahead, that the gap between where they were now and the future that I was seeing, other people couldn't bridge it from their own perspective. They couldn't bridge it from their own mindset. So it might as well have had been talking about, artificial intelligence, robots, and going to space and living on Jupiter. It might have been at that level for a lot of the people who was listening to me talk. And, when you research design systems, there's so many areas you could begin. Where do you begin to start? And what I found most useful was figuring out, okay, what is the biggest pain I have within my power to solve that will at least contribute to a small portion of maybe this bigger vision that I have? And how can I talk about it in a way that everyone understands? For example, we started with a UI system, a terrible UI system. It was on a single page, and it was almost unreadable by anyone else but me. At least at that stage, it was almost unusable. But what that allowed us to do was, because all of our design team members had to learn HTML, CSS, and use Adobe Dreamweaver for all prototypes. That's how they did prototyping about a year ago. And so I had been fortunate to be given this flexibility to pursue some things on the side. I'd worked as a consultant and the pace in this company was slow. So I was like, okay, I have some extra time. They knew they wanted UI templates because they knew it could be easier, but no one had the time. So sometimes it was a little bit outside of our work hours as well. So our focus was, okay, can we at least make this part of the process? Now designers don't have to learn front-end code. I took advantage of the fact that we actually technically used a design system, but it was like this government one built 6 years ago. There was no UI libraries. There was none of this. It was just a website really and code. That was it. And we tried to figure out, okay, how can we bring some urgency to doing things a little differently? And that was the old design system was about to be decommissioned. Great. We know it's not going to be usable in the future. We need something new, and constantly pushing that. And to build buy-in from executives, one of the most useful things was I didn't show it to them until we had a workable prototype. It was all about how can I make our internal teams' lives better through collaboration, because we knew that our wireframes, for example, we would design them. They would go to our business analysts or our developers, and then, but we'd still keep talking to the business and they would keep wanting changes. And our developer team would have written all these requirements and these documentations only to realize that all of our wireframes had changed. So there was all this rework. So we really focused on, okay, can we make collaboration as efficient as possible to remove that friction? Can we reduce the skills required to be able to prototype with business? So we knew it took about 4 days to get a prototype together. Sometimes, if you're really good, you could do it in a day. If you boot up Dreamweaver and you code real fast and you copy and paste templates galore and you go into a GitHub full of 100 different repository folders of past prototypes, just painting a picture on how painful this was for everyone. We saw, where can we first alleviate something here? How can we make it more visual? How can we make it more interesting? And that's, you know, where Figma came in for us. But yeah, really what we learned was, okay, where can I help people the most? Where can I make their day easier? And when people do that, they become your champions and it gets more on board. And recently we're at a point where I can get on with a ton of our board and our executives and show them how I'm drag and dropping from our design system to create a new form service in the span of about 2 minutes. And they might not know what I'm doing, but instantly they're like, wow, that was fast. And wow, that was fast becomes, can you tell me more about that? And it becomes, oh, what happened to that thing you showed me? Could you use it over there? We're a bit slower than you guys now. Can you maybe go check out that team and can you bring it in there? And just finding these elements of friction and these elements of connection, and sometimes maybe an element of wow, can be really pivotal in growing. And that's my own personal experience. Hopefully I didn't rant too long there, but it's been a process. Geez. Romit, do you have anything to add to that? Sorry.
Yes, I do. So personally, like in my last company, I had to go through this where I had to come up with a business case study. And we followed a concept called PR FAQ, which is like press release, which like Amazon generally follows. And in that, what happens is that you come up with a document and everyone reads it and they try to question it through the document. So in the business case study that I had to propose, I talked a little bit about like what design system is, because what I realized was that this document, which you generally talk about, or let's say even if you present a deck, it's not like everyone is not accustomed to know about design system. So a little bit about that and like what goals our team is trying to cover up. So one of the few goals that I tried to focus on was that I wanted to have faster execution to market. So like how basically design system can facilitate that, and how can we develop smoother QA and product releases? How can we optimize product experiences? How can we build efficient design and developer workflow? And how does the onboarding also works for designer and developer? So with that in mind, like there was this another thing that we started off was that about the impact. Now, like I and my manager, like we used to have this debate that talking about tools and technology is not something that they're interested in. What they're interested to know is like how would they benefit? How would the cost effectiveness was going to be there? So we built this framework where we said that, like, for designer and developer, how much time does it take to develop a single screen? And based on that, like if let's say we start implementing a new design system, how much optimization is expected, and then how much of a cost will be saved for them. And based on that, based on the the previous goals that I stated, we then expanded on different metrics on how would a designer would actually save save the efforts versus like how much developer would save the efforts. So one of the examples that like I started building was to say that if I want to say that our design system will be having like faster time to market, then from the designer perspective, it'll be like, okay, how much does design iterations are happening in general, like when you're working on a product, or like from a developer perspective, like how much does a code rework rate looks like. Likewise, we expanded to 30 plus such metrics to develop the right kind of documentation. And to further drill it down, we started saying that, hey, like within the whole product, how many variants are we seeing? Like how many unusual UIs we see everywhere? And what that actually then we started by saying that 100 variants we have seen. What does that mean for us? Because that says that our design system is not like cohesive enough, or it doesn't follow a certain standard, certain consistency, and that is basically impacting your brand. So when you build a personal touch to that slide deck or documentation, immediately the chief product officer or like CEO, they get impacted with these kind of statements. And that's where like I felt is much more required than the tools and technology, because tools and technologies are more of the secondary conversation once you start getting the approval from them. And again, this very aspect of it is not necessarily that like you will get at the first go, right? What I mean is that when there is fire, then only they will call you. So in this case, like they are expecting the business case study, because there is a fire around the place. And that's why they are much more emotional and much more targeted towards what specific goal they are expecting to achieve. So that's where these case studies or these documentation that we develop or pitch deck that we develop needs to be surrounded with those things in mind. That's where the right storytelling, the facts and figures and metrics would start working all together.
Can I just add to that, Romit? I feel like there's an extra layer here when we talk about UX metrics. And I feel like I see this a lot. We talk about UX metric like time on task, or the general click time, abandonment time. And when we talk about design systems, and correct me if maybe my perspective is wrong here, there's an extra layer that we go to connect that UX metric into the actual daily lives of how it manifests. I kind of sometimes think about it as like a back of the napkin metrics in a way. It's like we're taking a UX metric and trying to come up with how can we connect this to the way people are working now, not how can we kind of necessarily directly measuring it is good, but if you can get any time anyway, you can convert that into someone's yearly salary. You can then convert that into how much, your pure money value there. If you one of the great things recently about the maturity of design systems and design is we now have metrics. We have so many metrics. They're coming out of the wazoo. That we've got databases and lists and ad tags you can add left and right. We've got giant almost kind of population level UX studies that will just give you a dollar ratio for general improvements to the UX that you can then use that. And sure, it's not fully real or fully perfect, but it's a great guiding pattern to give you a baseline, a benchmark, something to go off when we come to kind of talking about metrics. And that is also a great segue into design system metrics. Let's get that out of the way first, because I think that is a big one everyone asks. How would you measure your design system? And we've talked about that kind of a bit right now, but I want to just maybe, do you have any resources you would recommend? Yeah.
So in terms of resources, it's very challenging to say, but there aren't enough resources. And the reason, I'll tell you why. when I started like building actually the documentation, and as I said earlier, right, when people start stating about metrics or design system, they use very, very niche terms like adoption rate. And you start feeling like, hey, oh, okay, this makes sense. Let me add that phrase into my doc and let me start talking about it. Then people start asking questions in a very in-depth manner, and then you are like in that stale state, like you don't know what the answers are. And so how it actually started was that like so there was this one guy, Nathan Curtis. He's a designer at 8 Shapes LLC. So he actually came up with the really cool metrics with like backed up answers on like what really metrics are, why it is required, how can it be used, and how can you communicate with like developers or designers or even generally company stakeholders. Second thing is I found one one website called as the designsystem.guides. And if you go to the designsystem.guide/metrics, you will find out that there are like a lot of like the list of metrics have been shown. Again, there are a list of metrics, but it doesn't mean that everything is going to be applied to you, because that means it's more work for yourself. So you have to be very careful about what you choose. And again, going back to the goals that you are going to pick up, what are the right KPIs or metrics? Again, these are very fancy words, but then what is it that you're going to connect with and how that end goal is going to look like? You have to have all that answers. And that way, like, your resource that you will be picking up is going to be extremely useful.
Thanks, Romit. Alex?
Yeah, just to share my experience on this, it's kind of interesting because I think when we say metrics and analytics, we kind of, it's like an umbrella term for like all these different things. So for example, like one way that we're using metrics to track the work that we do as a team, not the impact of the work, just the work we do, is like we hook up a looker board to Jira, and then we make sure that we write tickets in a certain way. And that's a PM thing, right? It's a project management thing. So it's like saying, yeah, here's all our goals, our OKRs, and then we look at the dashboard and that shows us how much we've done. So that's good for tracking progress. We can also use that same system to track like amount of new components added to the system in a quarter. And then you figure out how you want to write tickets for that and have the epics and the labels and stuff. But that's really internal to us, which is like useful stuff, good to have stuff. But then, yeah, if you're tracking like the impact of the system, I think it's like most things in life, it's like you can optimize it. You can have a really simple goal, which is like, we want to do this. And there's all this kind of stuff that can get in the way. And if you're not careful, you kind of get caught up in like, because it's such a complex area, you can really spend a lot of time in a lot of different places, like seemingly adding value, but not really, or maybe not adding as much value as you could. And so like where we think about adoption, we currently don't have a model for measuring adoption. It's kind of a manual process. And when we think about adoption, we think about adoption of the design system in Figma, which we need analytics for, Figma analytics, which we don't currently have. And then there's also the adoption rate of the Deel UI system in the app, which we also don't currently know. And there's not like a quick way to do that with our current system, the way it's set up. And yeah, just a quick comment on that. We've really been set up for speed, and like the big thing that we focus on is like getting stuff done quickly. And the flip side of that is that it really hurts us with this stuff. So yeah, basic things like understanding the adoption rate, it's like almost impossible to do quickly. But yeah, the other thing that I was going to say about surveys, so that's kind of on the adoption side, and then the team progress side. Something that I've known has been wrong for a long time but we haven't ever explored it, is like how people are using the system, how designers use the system. And again, this kind of comes down to like design and developers. So we recently launched a survey, I forget what it's called, Google do surveys, Google Forms. But yeah, we've just launched a survey. It ran for 2 weeks and I closed it. And the kind of smart thing about this, it's kind of like a hack of getting quantitative information about something in a qualitative way. So you can ask qualitative questions. What do you think of the system? What can we improve on the system? What don't you like about the system, etc. And then you can ask those questions, but you can give like a 1 to 5 reading on it. So 1 could be low and 5 could be really high. And it's like, do you know where to look for the documentation on how to contribute to the system? Like, is that clear? And then if the team's coming back like 1, 2, it's like, well, clearly there's an issue there and there's something you can do to improve that. So that's what we've been doing. And that's been really, really good. So we just launched that survey. There's like 5 questions that have this 1 to 5 model in it. And then we're going to do like surveys every month. And then we're going to have initiatives to combat those things. And then we want to see those numbers going up, basically. And if we can see that, then we know that the work that we're doing is having the right impact with the team. But yeah, it's kind of up to you, like which questions do you want to ask? And you can easily ask a bunch of questions and then miss something really important. So it kind of depends on experience. One last thing I'm going to mention, the thing we've done here as well is we've got team leads across all our verticals, team verticals. And we have also done interviews with those team leads they're like half an hour long. And we just talk to them and we say, hey, what are you seeing on the system? What can we do to improve it? Things like this. And then you kind of get like a personal, rather than it being a survey, it's more of a kind of personal qualitative thing. And then we make notes from that. And then that can then inform the surveys of things to look out for. But yeah, that survey has been like fully focused on design. We know that we need to do the same thing with dev and make sure that dev understand where to find the right documentation, how to look for things, all this kind of stuff. So it's, there's like, it's kind of cool. It's like, there's not like a clear like template that you just use, but you can kind of make it up for what you have and what your use cases are, which I think is really like a big part of the design system, the nature of design systems, because they can vary so much from company to company and project to project. Kind of makes sense that it's not just like the same thing. But yeah.
Oh, I also find you're not really measuring the design system, you're measuring the influence of the design system, which inevitably means your measurements are very rarely direct. I recently tried to put a survey out for us to just get at least an initial baseline of before the design system, which is a strange thing to measure. And the survey's completely bombed. They completely failed because we got no responses. None of the developers wanted to sit there and fill in a detailed survey giving me quant and qualitative information. And so we ended up having to scrap that after 3 weeks. And instead, we set up a workshop where we onboarded them into the design system, but in a way that was very specific to them. I'm not sure where I've got the resource here somewhere, but a person recently put out it's like this workshop worksheet pretty much to determine what's most important from at least a component design and documentation perspective for design systems. And what we did is we took this like big checklist of things you could have in a design system and used that with our developer teams, our test teams, and our design teams to figure out what did they think was most important. And from there gathered why did they think it was most important? What were the pains that they were feeling before the design system? And so we got very qualitative data. But I think that gets to the question on what are you trying to measure? Are you trying to gather evidence on why people should give you more money, more people, more man hours to support the project? Or are you trying to gather data on how you can improve it or where you need to focus your efforts? I think those are technically two different things intertwined, but the answer on what to measure will differ depending on which one of those or both you're trying to gather. And often you'll end up needing combinations of multiple ways of measuring, which I think gives you better, stronger ways anyway, than just relying on one single metric, which never works. Harisson.
Hey, yeah, this has been a really interesting one for me more recently. You know, we're in the stage right now where we're, you know, developing the business case for the design system, and you know, looking at two sides of the coin, you've got the offerings that we've got on one side are regulatory, so things that people must sort of abide by to do certain things, you know, so for example, in this case, you know, the license, you know, to drive a car, and then in, you know, you've got other you know, sort of instances where the products that you're offering are discretionary, so they're not mandatory, they're not required. And I think looking at those two sides of the same coin, you're looking at how you measure the, like, I guess the metrics, you know, the return on investment for those two product types. And there's not so much difference, I guess, when you're looking at those, but you know, I think, you know, depending on where your business is and what the goals of the business are and what they want to achieve, you know, you might be looking at things like brand reputation improvement, you know, sort of brand consistency. You know, you're looking at how quickly can you scale products and designs to meet, you know, like a market need that you need to act on. And that comes back to, you know, sort of really at the end of the day, you know, the business will see a gap in the market and then you need to rush to fill that gap. So how, you know, that time in between, you know, knowing there's a gap and then actually meeting the gap, can you shrink that, you know, with a really good design system and a really good, you know, way of working with your wider team, and if you can showcase through your metrics that return on investment, and that's quite broad, you can really make a huge impact, you know, in a business. So I think, you know, just to go back to a few points that we spoke about before, there's probably no right or wrong way to start doing that. It really depends on where the business is at the time and sort of what the needs and the goals are, the like, you know, sort of the business are, and then growing from there and trying new things and expanding on what you're doing to really, you know, to explore, to play, to understand, you know, what we can do to, you know, to meet those needs through a really great design system, like, and ways of working. So.
Wonderful. Thank you, Harris. So I just called you Harris for a second. I was like, oh, Harrison. So in a sec, we'll blast through a ton of questions, but I just wanted to get this one question out of the way first, and then we'll just power through a ton. Can you fail in your design system for the first time? I saw a question on this earlier that they fear that if they don't do it right, especially as a solo designer, it'll waste a lot of time for the developers, and that their team thinks it would require a lot of additional maintenance and see it more of a liability. So maybe can you touch on how failure has come into your experience as a design system, and maybe help address Rishabh's maybe fears there? Might be a way of putting it. Romit's first.
I'm just going to drop. I'm going to stay on the
all
call,
good.
but I'm going to, kind of go off and quickly do a meeting and then hope to come back.
No problem. Romit, do you want to come in this?
Yeah, I was actually excited to read that question because failure has been there, and I've experienced that firsthand. So so it's like I would say it started where I would say with the documentation or communication aspect. When you started speaking, when I started speaking with stakeholders, I realized that there were so many areas where I could have you know answered it right, or the right metrics I could have addressed in the meeting. Secondly, I would say in the implementation process, I would say it's very important that you are setting up the right expectation with your team leads, or with designers. And I realized that the veterans who have actually implemented a design system in general, they may not match with the goals that like my team would have, or the company has. And then that also fluctuates back to say that the design system is not going to work. And thirdly, it happened was that implementing the design system at the developer level, if the structure of the code is not correct, or it is not scalable enough, and in fact even from the designer's perspective, if you don't have the right kind of scalability, let's say we talk about design tokens, right? So if not all things are being considered, well tested, that also impacts in terms of failure, because again we are talking about building the right kind of an atomic design ecosystem around us. So I did see, or I did sense that failure as well. And then the last factor I would say is the things you can't control. So after I would say the extent of building the right strategies or the frameworks, there was this one point where the company itself said that, hey, you know what, we can't actually invest more on this. Maybe next year we will figure things out about it. And that itself became a design failure, because again the priority for them was more into the other aspects of the product rather than the design system, because it was a long-term stuff. So that's I would say my fair share of the failure.
Thank you, man. No, I'm very conscious that we've 5 minutes over the actual panel time. I think I was lost in what you guys were saying there. Harisson, I'm going to throw this over to you. Do you guys have an extra 10 minutes maybe to address some of the really specific questions? If not, that's all good, but I just want to make sure you're comfortable if we do stay on for an extra 10-ish, depending on how Alex goes as well. Yeah. Are you okay with that?
Yeah.
Romit?
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, Harisson. Okay, awesome. Do you want to give some words to that, Harisson, at all? The failure aspect, especially.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't think you can, and maybe this plays into my personal kind of belief system, is that you can't really fail. When you're designing a design system, you only learn and grow, and I think part of that. Part of the idea of failing is not getting it right the first time, but there are very few instances in life generally where you get things right the first time and you never have to touch them again. It's not a linear experience, and I think that's what a design system is. It's a living, breathing system which is evolving based on the needs of the users that you serve and the business that is serving those users. So and then also those, I guess, working within the system to bring the things to those users, the offerings and the tools. So I think you can't really fail, but you can only learn and grow. And I think the more that you explore the business, you explore user needs, you understand what the business wants to achieve, you can expand on where you need to improve your design system, and that can be, you know, a process that takes you know, months and years, and it will obviously you know, be faster with a team that is, you know, focused on that and solely that. But that is really hard to come by, you know, especially with a lot of you know, sort of businesses that are looking to stand up a design system. There's a lot to get through before you get to that point where you're, you know, you're designing the components with, you know, with an idea that this is exactly what the business needs. You know, you're often, you know, going through 3, 4, 5, 10 iterations of something before you get to the one that is, you know, fit for, you know, for the business.
Thanks, Harisson. And it took me 4 iterations before another designer was able to come in and eventually understand what the hell I was doing. I think I went through so many presentations where I had to re-pitch design systems again and again. And the number one thing that helped me is that I had a manager on my side. I had other designers, other people who I just built such a good relationship with, that if I was communicating it wrong, they would tell me to my face. They would be like, hey, you've got to say it this way. Or like, I don't understand. They were willing to sit on a call with me for 1 to 2 hours and slog through designer jargon. We have jargon as well. We're actually not very simple to speak to, especially if anyone asks you, oh, what do you do for work at a you know, dinner party? Depending on how you talk, some people, you know, I go on a bit. But yes, so having people on your side as you go through these evolutions, as you go through these changes, is vital, because you're going to do it wrong. It's kind of part of the process. There is no right. There are good things, there's best practice, there's better ways, but half the time it's trial and error. And I think my biggest recommendation for not the UI parts, like everything else, is design it with the people. You don't have to do it alone. You don't have to build all the documentation yourself. You don't have to put together the entire pitch for your design system by yourself. Lean on the people around you. They have so much insight into who you should speak to. Maybe you should phrase it differently, or maybe now is not the right time and you should focus on this aspect and come back to that later, or demonstrate that this part is actually the most important. Ask for priorities if you're unclear. I think that's the most useful thing you can do. I've learned so much from people when they've just been like, I don't understand that. You know, I realized yesterday I'd been speaking about the design system to our 2 designers for about 6 months, and I'd forgotten to introduce them to typography. I'd forgotten to tell them about a grid system and a layout. I'd just gone straight into components and UI, and they were like, but why did you choose spacing at that level? Why did you do that? And it's such a complex, and if you've gotten to take a look at the most recent Figma Schema conference, the Atlassian design system guys, they call it a hyper object. They call design systems a hyper object in the sense that it gets to a point where you can't understand every part of your design system. It becomes impossible. And I think accepting that is kind of key to not pulling your hair out, because you will. It's so frustrating. Like, I spent an entire week trying to design a table in Figma, and it was hell. Worst thing I've ever tried to design in my life. I don't know if you've all done tables. It doesn't work very well.
Yeah.
If anyone has a tip on that, dear God. But yeah. And sometimes I've had to start and talk about Figma more than I've had to talk about a design system, because they can see it. It's visual. We love visuals. You can talk to me about whatever else. Just give me something to look at and I'll be happy. Okay, I'm going to stay until Alex is here, but I'll just ask questions until we run out of time, people, patience, all of the above. So next question here, we've got what's different in mindset for a design system designer versus a UX designer? Is it the design process? Is the responsibility? And I feel like Alex would love this question, so I'll make sure to phrase it to when we get it back. But Harisson, Romit, what's the mindset like? Is it different from your perspective? How have you thought differently after dealing with design systems?
Yeah, it is. It is, I think, a mindset to some end. I mean, when you're in and you're designing a design system, you know, like you were, you know, reflecting on, you know, before, Ben, it's kind of a hyper object in the sense that, you know, you know, as this thing expands and grows, it will become so large one day that you couldn't possibly know how everything works and the detail. And I think changing your mindset to make things as clear and straightforward and fit for purpose, as you can from the beginning will help, build that buy-in and that speed to delivery, when you're designing a system. But I think, to some end, it really is. It really is a mindset, because you are thinking of so many different things, sort of both for now when you're designing it, and then for the future as well. So what will I need to take into account that will affect the way that this, will evolve and grow into the future. And some of those things too are, quite closely related to devs. How are the devs going to interact and frame? Sorry, not frame, but view and read your designs. How are they going to to manage the handoff? And although that's not so much something that you build, but what about when you're writing about your design system? The design language, how is that ingested by an individual? How are they reading that? What's the best way to transmit that information from your head and from what the business needs are to something that somebody can read and understand and then action. So there's a few things to think about, and I am still very much exploring all of these facets myself. So I'm on that journey of learning and growing myself.
Romit?
I mean, Harisson, just hit in the coffin. So I mean, there's no better way to say it, because definitely design system designers, they have to think through all the spectrum of the products. Just designing one component, how is it going to multiply, or is it going to be a domino effect? Is it going to be a blooming effect? I completely correlate that, for a UX designer, they have to execute building pages relatively faster. But for the design system design, it's okay, one wrong move and everything is going to be a claustrophobic effect. And I think that's what builds the I would say responsibility more for the design system designers compared to UX designers. And I would say they are very, I would say, in a logical level, they try to think a lot in terms of scalability and consistency, and how other components can correlate together. So I do see that there is this kind of this creativity and intellectualness that they start producing while talking about a component or working on a component. And I think what other things that Harisson has mentioned is really spot on, because I think communication in terms of how would other designer would get onboarded to their existing components? How would the language also would be would matter when they start implementing those components? How should developer realize or when to use certain components? It's this I would say it's not simple in general. I've been looking at Atlassian design system as well as Ant design system, and the kind of expectation that designers have kept for developers or any product managers who are looking at their components, they have really thoroughly studied about it. And I think it requires a lot of experience and understanding, through that whole process. So definitely, I think there's a huge difference between the design system designer versus a UX designer.
From my perspective, I think you are now more than just a UX designer. You know, as a UX designer, we sometimes are able to just keep our head in design, but now you're not just design, you're the glue between the designers, the developers, the kind of the operations, which is why I put it under design operations in many ways. You're dealing with more than just the UX here. And design systems, I like to think of them as like a platform. They are like the glue between all of these teams and all this kind of disparity and consistency between the branding, between the developers, between the designers. It's like a platform for communication between all of us, which is why I think, your mindset definitely changes from a UX designer to someone to when you begin a design system, because you're no longer a UX designer. You're something else. You're a hybrid. You're kind of between everyone at that point, because that's your purpose, is to kind of can bridge between everyone. And that's a hard thing, because it's a lot of different stuff. And what I put in the comment there around eventually you'll have to let go of control. I had that recently where I built the design system, and then I had to let its new form take over, built by other designers, built by the feedback from developers. It was no longer me making the decisions. If they wanted something this way, and even if I didn't think it was the best thing or the most perfect thing, this became our design system, not my design system. And that was, I think, a vital point of transformation there. And it's still ongoing. We're still getting that ownership across everyone. And that's very difficult thing. I think sometimes for us as designers, especially if it's our baby, we don't want to let that go. And great timing, Alex. I know we're over time a little, but there was one question I really wanted to get out of the way, and you timed this perfectly. The mindset difference, Alex, between a UX designer and versus a design system designer, or whichever title. How are you different now? What's different about that?
Yeah, I think what you just said was quite interesting about letting go. Like, once the system hits a certain level of maturity, like if the system is successful, then you do go through that phase of kind of detaching from it. And that happened with me, like stepping into more of a PM role, where like now another designer does all the stuff on it, and he's doing all these cool Figma updates, which I really enjoy doing, but now I don't get to do. And it's and another thing you said as well is like something I experienced when I first worked on the first system was I really loved the idea of like being in control of everything and like designing all the gaps between all the components and having everything be like 100% kind of controlled, which maybe says something about me. But there is like, I think with companies like Apple and Tesla who make all their own components, there is this kind of like sanctimonious kind of idea that if you design everything, it's kind of completely harmonious and perfect. And it's never really the case. Like, I think there's a famous quote from someone in the industry that says like, design systems kind of always fail. Like they're kind of destined to fail. If you think about them from this like top-down way of thinking. Whereas the approach that I've taken in the last 2 years has kind of been much more like bottom up rather than top down. So rather than thinking like, again, to your point earlier of saying like a design system will help us do this, it will give us accessibility, it will give us tokens. Rather than kind of promising all these grand things, it's like, really understanding where to focus on where you can deliver the most value, and then kind of running with that. I haven't answered your question. So to summarize, I did try and leave a comment in the chat. I know I'm not very good at like Zoom chat and connecting to the right answers. But for me, it's thinking in systems. That's kind of the biggest thing. I don't know if someone's already said this, so apologies if I'm repeating. But the thing that I see a lot of the time is that designers will design components and they'll design it for a very specific use case. And say you have a company that has like 5 different teams, like a fintech team and a HR team, and you're building all these different products, right? And then somebody designs a component for one of those products. Well, really, if you want it to be added to the design system, the whole point of that component is you want it to be as kind of dumb and as generic as possible, so that it can facilitate like many uses across other teams. And so there's this like strange balancing act of like having it be kind of unique enough that it's useful for specific things, but then also be generic enough that it's shareable for other things. And then obviously there's a certain amount of kind of customization, and you can have variants as well. But yeah, understanding that when you make a component that you're, it's not, how can you go from like this one use case to something that is useful for other people? And the only way you can really do that is like, you can guess, I guess, but really you want to do this like research exercise where you collect all these different use cases from people. And that helps, but in general, it's like this kind of systems thinking thing. Whereas like, instead of thinking about something in a single application, it's like, how can this be applied across different things? And then another layer to this whole conversation that we've not really mentioned is patterns, like pattern libraries. And that's kind of like how you enforce, or how you use patterns consistently across the app to make certain flows and experiences the same. And that's a really, like, that's a real system kind of thinking thing too. But yeah, like a real, something I've noticed is like, people that do it tend to be like, really like kind of obsessed with like information architecture and like categorization, like organization, like folder structures. Like they typically like quite organized with their folder structures and stuff. And I'm generally quite messy in my personal life, but then like really organized in my work life. So it's not like, just one type of personal personality. Yeah.
Messy in the personal life, clean in the work life. I'm hoping that connects with many people. Does anyone else have any? Okay, so we've answered a lot of questions. I think it's time to wrap this up. I think we could keep this going forever. There's so many areas we could dive into. I think, communicating with developers and the developer process is an entire multi-day panel in itself. There's probably a conference on it somewhere at this point. Any closing thoughts for the people who are probably working the design system space? Maybe they're struggling. Is there anything, recommendations or advice you'd offer them from your own experience? Yeah.
One thing I was going to mention earlier actually is the amount of shareable libraries that exist now are like really good resources. So there's MUI, which is what we use. It's a React library. And yes, it's a free, you can pay for it. You can unlock more complex components. But that's a free React library. Then you can pay for the Figma templates as well. There are lots of people doing things like this to make resources that like free you up from doing all the work yourself. And again, that kind of plays into this idea of like designing everything yourself and kind of having it be a certain way compared to like doing what's the most efficient thing. Yes, so there are those. There's like a ton of resources. In general, we try and use as much of other people's stuff as we can, and we actually don't try and spend too much time like making stuff unique unless we need it. For example, we use like Google's icons and things like that. In terms of like a closing comment, yeah, I don't know. I think the biggest thing for me is like talking to people about it. You'll learn so much from that. It's like in the same way that you should always be engaged in the user testing, like always communicating with customers to really understand about like what works and why. Design system people, our customers are designers. You're usually on your team. So I think it's really easy to kind of go down the rabbit hole of like working on things and making improvements. And it's really easy to forget that you should, take time to speak to people and understand what's working and what isn't, and what they like about it and what they don't, and what they want to see. And yeah, typically, the conclusion that we've had from that, this is my final point, But the thing that we've learned from that conversation is that we've had documentation in Figma, and we kind of have all this stuff scattered in all these different places. And when we think of like a source of truth for the website, we really just think of Figma. But really, we're understanding that what we need is like the typical design system website, right? Like, so we want to have documentation there, pattern libraries, foundations, how to use the system, links to all the things, like really just a home of everything related to the system. But it wouldn't replace Storybook. So we still have Storybook as the kind of component library, and then all the documentation for developers would live in Storybook. So that's the kind of strategy that we've got. So before it was just thinking like everything on one site, and now it's like, yeah, okay, like we're not going to replace Storybook. So yeah, we're looking at like zero height for the system, and then Storybook separate. And I think that's going to be like a really like winning strategy for us. Yeah, that's me.
Harisson.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you made a really good point in there before, Alex, around being in touch with the people that you're designing this for, as well as the ones that you're designing it with. And I think that sort of research component to everything is really critical to understanding what you're doing, why, the benefit that it's going to bring. And the research will be quite broad, because you're not only trying to understand the users that you're designing for, but the ones that will be using the tools and the systems to design for the users. You're understanding what the business needs are, so what their goals are, and the amount of buy-in that you're likely to get, and sort of building those relationships. So I think I think when we're looking to do that, there are some really big players that have done it really well, and obviously these players will have a lot more resources than what a lot of businesses do. But if you're looking at something like the Apple HIG guidelines, so that's a really good one. It's applicable mainly to sort of their operating systems. So if you're looking at sort of designing an operating system, it's maybe a little bit more relevant. But if you look at it from a high level, you can look at the way that they apply sort of those design frameworks that will frame the way that they expand their design tools and the offerings, and why they're doing it. And then from a research sort of component, you sort of might be looking to the NNG group, and I'll just share their link. I think really everyone in the Zoom call, I'm sure has been to their sort of website at least like a dozen times during different times of their career. But they have really great articles on really good things that can help you reframe the way that you look at things, and that's a really great way to be able to to expand your knowledge and to sort of learn a bit more. But I think really that sort of research component is really important. Talking to those around you. So even if you're in a business that is only beginning to design a design system, or to build that trust with the business, I think talking to those that have already been through it to understand what that's been like for them, and whether they're a big sort of business or a small business, really great to understand what their blockers were, what was not working for them, what they found they needed to sort of revisit, really just absorb as much information as you can, so when you start to build speed and force behind what you're doing, you're really well informed. So that way you can just lean, back on that and say, well, this is why I'm doing that, or, based on this metric, or, based on this example, this is why we're doing that. And it's really, really easy that way to reinforce what you're doing, why, and the value that that you'll be able to bring to the business.
Thank you, Harisson. Romit, closing thoughts, recommendations.
Of course. So yeah, I'm coming from a startup like a background, so I'll just try to go in that way. So I would say that we have tons of design systems all around us, and before that they came up with a good business case study. So any C-suite panels or the leaders, they are well versed about design systems in general. So but the thing is, when you are coming from a niche companies or startup companies, not they are more focused on fast-paced environments, and considering that it's very much understandable that we try to understand their emotions and what their goals are from a company point of view, and build the goals accordingly, and accordingly multiply it with the metrics of the design system. Talking about the implementation side of the process side, I would say is the outside world, not everyone have the same journey. Some have a very established design system already, or just a one-page sketch file, and they just had to go through that whole implementation of a much more scalable process. So it's very interesting to see today different articles are being mentioned and been mentioning about how they have really built up a better design system. So but then rooting back to what problems you want to solve, always try to see that fine line or on how they have solved those problems, because I can tell you that as I said, there are tons of articles, but not everything would resonate based on what you want to solve. So you have to be very careful about what you pick, and you have to have a good vision far ahead to say that if they come up with hard questions, you should be able to answer in the rightful way. So again, going back to the value of design system, I would say that think in a perspective where how you can actually find the right clues by reading articles from major companies, but also from the niche writers who have got through these harder problems while connecting with people who don't know anything about design system at all. So there you might find the right kind of values to build a kind of perspective.
Okay, thank you, Romit, so much. Thank you, guys. Please, everyone, join me in an applause for thanking our panel members for coming on and sticking around for so much longer than our original planned time, and willing to chat it out over such a complex topic, but also a fun one in many ways. And I feel like we could go down many rabbit holes. I hope you've had some of your questions answered. Please, connect with our panel members on LinkedIn if they're open to it. If you'd like, if you have questions, reach out, directly. I'm sure they would be happy to chat. Thank you so much for coming and sticking around for over half an hour more than originally. And yeah, thank you so much. And thank you, Harisson, Romit, and Alex. Hope you all have a wonderful day. I will stick on for an extra few minutes, and the recording will go out in the next 24 hours.
Thanks. See you soon.
Thanks. Cool, guys. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
and thank you, Ben.
Thank you, guys. Have a nice day.
Thanks. Oh,
awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Kalsa. Thank you, Katarzyna. Thank you, Cosmina. Thank you, Natalia. Raymond. Thank you, Razor. Thank you, Rizhab. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Bai. Thank you, Balasenya. Thank you, Chioma. Thank you, Kalsa, Matsumi, Natalia. Thank you for joining. Have a wonderful day.